Well, hello and welcome, everyone. Welcome to Anomalies, a program about unusual things that we don't always understand, but they're always fascinating, and we're always thrilled to have you with us. My name is Gwen Farrell. I am a co-host on Anomalies, and today I'm very, very happy to have a special guest with us, Preston Dennett, who has wonderful information to share with us. And welcome, Preston.
Thank you, Gwen. Thank you for having me on the show.
Good. I'd like to start off and just tell our audience a little bit about your background, if that's okay, and then we'll get into some of the interesting information. So,
yeah.
Okay. All right, let's do it.
I
Preston
can do
Dennett
that.
began, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Okay, yeah. All right. Preston Dennett began investigating UFOs and the paranormal in 1986. Since then, he has interviewed hundreds of witnesses and investigated a wide variety of paranormal phenomenon. He is a field investigator for the Mutual UFO Network, MUFON, a ghost hunter, a paranormal researcher, and the author of 29 books and more than 100 articles in numerous magazines, including Fate, Atlantis Rising, Nexus, Paranormal Magazine, and others. In addition to writing nonfiction books about UFOs and the paranormal, Preston is also an award-winning science fiction writer who has sold many speculative fiction stories to markets such as Andromeda Spaceways, Daily Science Fiction, Sci-Fi Journal, Stupefying Stories, and many others. His writing has appeared in several newspapers and been translated into German, French, Italian, Portuguese, Russian, and Icelandic. And he has appeared on numerous radio and television programs, including Coast to Coast, the History Channel's Deep Sea UFOs, that was a terrific one, and UFO Hunters. In addition, he teaches classes and lectures on various paranormal subjects across the United States. So, Preston Dennett, welcome again to Anomalies.
Thanks, Gwen. Yeah, thank you very much.
What I'd like to begin with today is a little about your background. That's usually the best place to start. You stated that you began investigating UFOs and paranormal in 1986. Can you tell us a little about that?
Yeah, certainly. Boy, my mind kind of boggles when I think how long I've been doing this. I was pretty young in 1986. I was 21 years old and a real skeptic. I did not believe in UFOs. I was sure that they were the result of hoaxes, hallucinations, and misperceptions, honestly, and that people who thought they saw them were just seriously misguided or deluded. And in fact, my brother once came running to the house when I was a teenager and claimed to have seen a UFO, and I just told him, no, you didn't. I don't want to hear it. Mm-hmm. But of course, that did all change very abruptly in 1986. I actually remember the exact day. It was November 17, 1986, because there was, there was a news report on, the mainstream evening news about a sighting over Alaska. You may have heard of it, Gwen. It was Captain Kenju Torochi, JAL Airlines.
Yes, JAL.
Right, very famous case. But it was funny because the news report was maybe a minute or two long. And while they did show the pilot, Kenju Torochi, they really kind of joked about it more than anything. And did not say that, oh, this plane had been followed for many miles and it appeared on radar and there was outside witnesses and the whole crew saw it. It was nothing like that. They just kind of said, oh, did you hear about this crazy pilot? But it intrigued me because they did show the captain and I thought, wow, why would he do that? Why would he say he saw a UFO when he clearly didn't? I assumed he was seeing a reflection off the ice cap. That's what I was rationalizing, which is what skeptics do. They'll find a way out. But it interested me enough to ask my brother, Mark, my older brother. I have 3 older brothers. So I asked him and he's like, you really want to hear now? I'm like, yeah, tell me what you think you saw. And he described an incredible sighting. I mean, Gwen, it knocked my socks off. He and his two friends were driving down Reseda Boulevard at night. This is in Southern California, late 1970s, and saw what they thought was a helicopter, though it clearly wasn't, because it was quite close to them. It was at treetop level, was making no noise, and it had a little dome on top and colored lights around it, and it was stopped there in front of them. They were on a slight rise, so they were looking at it at eye level. And they're like, what is that? And so they did what, teenage boys do. They were 19, 20, thereabouts. And they chased it down Reseda Boulevard for several miles. And what's funny is it would stop and wait for them. They get right up close to it and it would dart ahead. And yeah, they said they passed several other cars who were also chasing it and pointing and exclaiming. And I ended up talking to his two friends, Phil and Greg were their names, because Mark said, if you don't believe me, call them, you know them, which I did, of course. And they confirmed his story. And that's how it really started for me, because that got me interested enough to ask other people within my family, my friends and coworkers. And I got such a shock. I could not believe that my sister-in-law had seen a UFO and gray ETs.
Wow.
Yeah, my other sister-in-law had sightings of little blue beings when she was a little girl. I had several family friends who had had very dramatic sightings. One, Sylvia is her name, she saw an egg-shaped object. They were actually drawn outside of their home by this low buzzing noise. And she had a friend with her too. Every single one of these people who I knew had witnesses to support their story. And that blew one of my misconceptions. I always thought people were alone when they saw UFOs. I don't know why. I thought that. And I thought they were not educated. Well, Sylvia, she's a pilot. She's a flight instructor, trained scuba diver. And, I brought it up at work. I worked at an office at that time. And the lady I worked with for a good long time, whose desk was right next to mine, said, oh yeah, me and my whole family, we saw this star-like object darting around.
Oh.
You should talk to, my family. And I did. It turned out her daughter, who I knew, had seen grays as well, had been taken on board. And someone else at work had missing time. So yeah, that's how it kind of rolled out for me. I ended up checking out books. So I thought, I'm going to disprove these guys. I'm going to show them it's swamp gas.
It is. Yeah.
But of course it wasn't. I was amazed to find out that this was a serious subject. This was something that had been studied for decades. I was a latecomer. I had no idea that there was a government cover-up. So I was tremendously naive about all of this. And that's when I found MUFON, which was about a year or two into this. I think I became a field investigator in 1988. So I took their take-home test back then.
Yes. Yes.
When there was no internet, mind you. I thought, well, this is going to be easy because this is a take-home test. How hard can it be? Well, it was really hard.
Yes.
It had a whole section on UFO history, which I breezed through because I had every book by that point. Every journal. I mean, I joined every UFO group there was. I was attending conventions. But yeah, there was a section on photography. That was difficult. Meteorology. Well, I was going through college, so I was able to, I actually did really well in the test. I missed 2 questions. One which, I didn't know, and one which was, I marked the wrong answer. I was so mad. I wanted a perfect score. But, so yeah, that's how it started for me.
Well, very interesting. And a lot of people begin that way, I believe. A lot of my clients that I've talked to over the years say, oh, I never believed in it. And for years they didn't. And then something happens, and that's all it takes is one thing to really turn you around, or to get you so interested in it, then you begin to move forward on a different path on your own. So yeah, interesting. I became a field investigator for MUFON in 2016. And I do remember the test. I do remember that test. And I was the same way. I thought, oh, that's going to be so easy, no big deal. Even though the book is very thick, a lot of
Right.
material in it, I thought no problem. But actually, there were a couple tricky questions in there. I don't think I did 100% either, but it was good enough to get going in it. So, so are you still a MUFON field investigator now? Or are you just doing this work on your own?
Mostly on my own. I'm still a field investigator. I still subscribe to MUFON. I have since 1986. I should have, signed up for their lifetime membership, which was $1,000. I probably would have saved money at this point.
At this point, yeah. So, well, you're still involved, and that's what's important. Have you been able to use the cases that you investigated for MUFON in your research, or is that not allowed, or how does that work with MUFON?
No. Initially, I would just hand it over to them, which is one of the reasons I started working more independently. I still absolutely support them. I speak at local meetings and at the National MUFON a number of times, usually once a year or thereabout. But yeah, I kind of moved independently because I felt like there was a lot of people who were not getting the message.
Yes.
My friends and family, half of them still were skeptical. I
Mm.
kind of divided the family.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, my dad never came around to the day he died.
Mm.
And same is true for a number of people in my family. Mark, of course, he believed in it. Both my sisters, they came around, and I convinced at least, two of my brothers. So eventually, yeah, they all came around at some point because, I was very gung-ho. I'm like, you need to listen to this police tape, which I got from the, it was leaked out of the police station. And that convinced my brother Stephen. He's like, okay, maybe there is something to this. But yeah, it was.
Good.
This was something that did take over my life.
Mm.
I was, I worked full time till recently, so this was not something I did full time by any means. At nights, weekends. I filled up a room with books.
Yes, I see in the background.
Yeah, exactly, and that's only some of them.
So,
I started writing articles pretty
mhm.
early in, and wrote articles for 10 years, or was researching for 10 full years before I did put out my first book, which was about healing cases.
Oh, I know that book, and I want to talk to you a little bit about that today. So yes, yes, I ended up myself discontinuing being a field investigator because I had another direction I wanted to go within this field as well. So I kind of understand that, it's good to find your own path in your own way. And no organization, even one as big as MUFON, is going to be able to help everyone. So if you can find a path and a way to help people and reach out, then I think that's important to do that. And we can do that on our own, and then we can let MUFON go ahead and do, what it can do and what it's really good at. So yes, something I want to mention is all the books I did mention that you had written 29 books, which that might not be correct. Is there a 30th book now, or is it still 29? Oh,
it's 30.
Okay, all
31.
right. Oh, wow. Okay. Well, most researchers and writers in this field focus on only one or two types of contact experience or sighting experience. But you talk about everything. You talk about a wide variety. And I think that, first of all, that's very interesting. But also, I think that's very important because I believe most people who are not involved in this field don't realize the wide variety of contact experiences that there are out there. Most people, most media and movies and TV focus on, typical abduction type scenarios. And while those are valid for some people, that's not all there is. And so the fact that you are telling people about these things and you're getting people's experiences are out there is very important. So I'm happy to see that you're writing those books. I love them. They're easy reading. They're very interesting. And, you know, I always know that they're things that really happen to real people. So that's what is so important with that. So I had a question. I ran across someone somewhere. I saw it in one of your interviews. Someone had asked you, is it possible to use a Ouija board to contact alien beings? What do you say?
Yeah, that was, I love looking at the more unusual aspects of this phenomenon.
Mm-hmm.
Because like you say, it's layers and layers and layers to this.
Mm-hmm.
And the paranormal is absolutely connected to all of this. So I ended up researching ghosts and out-of-body experiences and levitation and channeling and near-death experiences and psychic abilities and all of this healing. And yeah, I ran across that a couple of times. And after like the third or fourth time, I'm like, you know what? I need to take a deeper look at this because no one is talking about this.
Yeah.
And the first case that really struck me as being legitimate came from a very well-respected researcher, Frank Salisbury, who was a biologist from Utah University. And he wrote a book called The Utah UFO Display. One of the first researchers to sort of coin that term, that UFOs will put on a display for people.
Display. Mm-hmm.
Which they do. At any rate, he had a case involving two children who were using a Ouija board and apparently contacted an ET, or UFO occupants, I should say, who said that, yeah, we will show ourselves to you in this location at this time, which happened to be the Roosevelt Hospital. This is in Roosevelt, Utah. Okay. And they live like right across the street from it or within viewing distance. And so it was just a couple of days, or be there at this time. And they were, that day came, and their mom said, you said the UFO would show up, you better go outside and check. And sure enough, it did. And not only did they see it, there was about 10 or 20 witnesses in the area who saw a very large glowing craft or oval. I'm not sure if it was a metallic craft, but it was definitely unidentified. And it moved and it followed one car above it, and it hovered over the hospital briefly. And I mean, it came when it was predicted to come. Wow. And I thought, wow, is that interesting?
Yes, very.
And I started digging up other cases, and there were a number of them. That's easily the best of them, because I like Frank Salisbury as a researcher. He gave quotes from the witnesses, but I found about a dozen or so in the literature. And I'm gonna put a disclaimer here. I'm not recommending anyone use a Ouija board.
Okay.
I'm just saying, because as a paranormal researcher, I know people who have used a Ouija board and regretted it. They opened themselves up to what is essentially a dark haunting that did not work out well for them. So I just want to underline that. I'm not saying that anyone should use this as a method, but it's been done. And I think it's important we investigate all aspects of this phenomena.
Sure.
And I thought it was interesting because it speaks to that connection that people report, having poltergeist phenomena following a UFO sighting or before. That does turn up. And ETs being very telepathic, that is their main way of communicating, especially when someone's on board. I think it speaks to that as well. So perhaps this is a valid method.
But it wouldn't be the one that you suggest that people use, right?
No. Having looked into it, if you want to make contact, you can. There's many ways to do it. I think one of the best is to, hook up with someone who's a contactee, become their friend, go to their house. They're seeing stuff all the time.
Yeah.
You can do CE5 work. Stephen Greer popularized it, but he's not the only one. It was being done years before he did it. Now there are groups all over the world basically using meditation and lights to call down UFOs.
Mm.
I had a really interesting case of that myself before. Stephen Greer used it in his book. Like, here's how you can do it. Here's a case from Preston Dennett. I thought, wow. When I heard him say that, I'm like, whoa, because I had this guy I interviewed. Arnie Weiler was his name, and he worked for NBC doing special effects.
Hmm.
And he had gone down to Santa Monica in California to set up a peacock's tail in using pitchel lights. Those are big, bright, colored lights, which you can computerize.
Yeah.
And he set him up, and a peacock's tail is almost a full disc, right? And so it was colored lights around this almost half disc shaped object. And they turned it on, and he says, Preston, I could not believe what happened. These two UFOs came swooping down.
Oh my gosh.
Investigate. Yeah. And I'm like, really? And I did a full long interview with him. I'm like, was anyone else there? He's like, oh, sure. There was a crowd of us. I'm like, well, can you name it?
Wow.
Because, I always like to follow up, and
Mhm.
one person's testimony is great, but if you can corroborate it with another's, well, that's gold. And he's like, sure, I still know one of the guys. He's the guy who actually does this regularly, and his name is Rick Liebert. And he says it because he pointed him out. He's like, Rick, look. And Rick's like, for sure. This happens every time I set these lights up. And I'm like, please give me Rick's number.
Yeah.
And he did. And long story short, Rick did confirm that incident. I said, Arnie says this happened before. He's like, oh, yeah. And I'm like, can you tell me? And he says, well, there was this incident in 1978 in San Diego where they had set up a green argon laser to play in tune to Pink Floyd and a radio station, right?
Mhm.
It was a publicity stunt. And they had to get the permission from the FAA
Mhm.
to do this, because this is a laser going up into the sky. They didn't want planes,
Mhm.
interacting with this. And he said as soon as they turned that 22-watt green argon laser on, this V-shaped object showed up and came right down over this was the tallest building then in San Diego, the tallest building. And he says it wasn't more than 50 feet overhead. And there was another one that was some distance higher, but came so low they could hear it going, making a humming noise.
Hmm.
And it had lights on all along each side of the V. So those were the cases I put in an article for UFO Universe.
Mm.
And Stephen Greer quoted them. And he actually came up and thanked me. He's like, you're the one who kickstarted me to form CSETI. It was those
Really?
articles that really got me,
Mm.
Gave him the encouragement, I guess, the inspiration.
Yes.
It did, which turned out to be such a huge deal in the UFO field.
Yes, it has. I'm sure a lot of people have found their paths or more direction in their paths through the work that you have done and your books and articles and teaching and all the things that you do. You mentioned before about not having a division between what we experience. And I remember in the old days, it used to be, we used to always keep UFOs investigations over here and paranormal over here. But in the past, I don't know, for me, I see 5, 6, 7 years, something like that with the people I work with. That's not happening anymore. And I don't think it ever was happening. I think it's just we thought of it that way. We felt like we had to put them in boxes in order to be able to understand them. But you're absolutely right. And so many more people who are in my groups talk about having mixed experiences, if you want to call that, being taken aboard a craft and seeing that not only otherworldly beings, but also the ghost of their relatives or sometimes pets even. So this is a huge, huge thing for us to be thinking about. It's consciousness, whatever consciousness is, but that's definitely something that people are talking about a lot. I see a lot with the people that I work with now. So, and I'm glad that you're doing that too, moving in that direction.
I did that very early on. It was funny. I respect researchers who are like, I just want to focus on the nuts and bolts.
Yes.
This was a time when this was a big pill to swallow. If you're talking about UFOs and then you're saying, well, there's levitation, there's telepathy, people moving through walls, there's precognition. I mean, this is a lot for people to swallow. So I think some researchers just decided, you know what? I'm not going to make any headway.
They're not going to do it.
Because I don't know if you're aware of this, but this shocked me when the UFO field began. Most researchers wouldn't touch any cases involving humanoids, would not touch them. It was just sightings. They didn't want to talk about what's inside these objects.
Mhm.
But yeah, early on, people started talking about ghosts and stuff. And I'm like, well, you know, I didn't believe in ghosts either. I had seen one, I still didn't believe it. I just thought, you know, I'm losing my mind.
Mhm.
But yeah, I think it's important that we look into all, because it is connected. If you're throwing away parts of a person's testimony, you're not going to solve any mysteries that way.
Absolutely right. And there is so much in it. It seems like the longer I do this, the fewer answers there are, or the more questions there are about it. And I am kind of perhaps a little bit luckier than you, because I don't do any investigations anymore. I just work with experiencers as a therapist. And so I kind of focus on people and not so much on what's really happening with the other parts of the experience. I think people like you are still out there really trying to get answers. You're investigating and you're talking to people. And so that's marvelous. Really interesting.
Well, what you're doing is so important, because there's not a whole lot of people doing that. And I have to tell you, I do get a lot of calls from people who have no interest in being recorded or interviewed. They just want some answers.
They just want some answers. Yeah, that's
people
right.
will call me weeping. I'm like, please, can you help me? And that's always been my number one priority.
Yeah,
It's
great.
just to, you know, help people, because
Mhm.
I can't tell you how many times people have called me, said, I've not talked to my spouse about this. No one in my family knows.
Oh,
Please don't use
absolutely.
my name. You know, I don't do
Mhm.
drugs. I'm well educated. I've got a good job. You know, no history of mental illness. People are having a hard time with this, or certainly more so back decades as
Yes.
today.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah. So one thing that you mentioned is your first book, which was about healing. That was the first book I ever bought of yours years ago. And as a therapist, I have used that book many, many times. Um, and I'm constantly getting people now who ask me in my groups about healings, about, well, they think they've been healed, they aren't sure, they want information. And I always say, you need to look at this book by Preston Dennett. It is the Bible of healings by otherworldly beings. I have a few books that I've collected over the years that I consider the Bibles of specific things, and I can point people in those directions. And so your book on healings was phenomenal and very interesting, and have heard so many times over the years people talk about this. It's kind of like we were just talking about. It seems like in the beginning, nobody wanted to talk about it. It was kind of something people didn't, because they didn't think everybody was going to believe them. But now there are so many instances, I find, of contact that have healing involved in them. So I'd like you to talk a little about maybe how you got involved in the writing about the healing, and if there are some particular things that you enjoyed investigating and that you'd like to share with our audience about how sometimes people are healed this way.
Yeah, that was, I never really meant to write a book about that,
Really?
because honestly, yeah, I was not thinking about writing books at that point. I was writing articles. A book seemed pretty daunting to me. An article was something I could handle.
Yes.
But, you know, I started to realize that the way this phenomena, and I don't really like that word, this subject was being portrayed was not entirely accurate. There was a lot of fear, a lot of disinformation, a lot of confusion about what contact was. And I, you know, kind of bought into the narrative that this is people being kidnapped against their will, and this is an awful experience, and
Yes.
you know, they're being experimented on, which, as I started looking objectively at the accounts and throwing away my own prior misconceptions and beliefs, I realized I was wrong. And I started to reverse my opinions, because a lot of people were telling me that they had had a spiritual awakening, that they had gotten incredible amounts of information, that they were warned about all kinds of, you know, things like nuclear proliferation and our warlike ways, greed and corruption, pollution, destruction of the environment. These are all very positive things. People were telling me how they had been taken to the engine room and shown how the craft works, or taken up to the control room and like, sit in the seat, we'll let you pilot the ship. I'm like, wow, this is really interesting. And how it rolled out to healings was I had interviewed this lady who I still know, she doesn't want her name used, but she was one of the first I'd interviewed who had kind of broken through that missing time barrier, which is so often a problem when people have onboard experiences. She started remembering all of it consciously as it happened. And she was describing incredible spiritual, benevolent experiences. And she says, you know, they healed me. This was before she had broken through that barrier, actually. But I'm like, what do you mean? She says, well, I was diagnosed with a cyst in my fallopian tubes, and I had to have surgery. This was diagnosed with MRIs and so forth. She had a lot of pain and other issues with it. And the day before surgery, she had a visitation in her bedroom. She did not remember really what happened other than that they came in there. She thought, well, this is odd because I'm about to go to the doctor, the surgeon, the next day, which she did. And they did the pre-op imaging. And they said, they came into her room, and I think it was a nurse or a doctor was kind of angry, a little truculent with her. And they said, what's up? Why are you here? And she says, well, I'm here to have, what do you mean, why am I here? To have the cyst removed. And they said, well, there's no cyst. You had surgery, didn't you? You went to another doctor.
Oh.
She's like, oh no, knowing what had happened. She said, no, I didn't. They said, well, yes, you did. And they showed her x-rays, and they said, look, there's fluid here. There cannot be. This shows that you've had surgery. Let me see your abdomen. Those look like laser scars. What is that? And she kind of just played dumb. I asked her, like, why didn't you just be honest? She says, are you kidding me? I am not going to tell them that, I think I'm taken on board, which I respect, having talked to people who are actually put in mental institutions for going public. But yeah, she was healed. I thought, well, isn't that remarkable? Because here's proof. She had really amazing healing abilities too, by the way.
Oh, yes.
She demonstrated to me. She healed someone of gestational diabetes. She brought another person out of a coma. She was able to pulse healing energy through my feet so I could feel it. I mean, this lady was for real. She showed me UFOs twice. They came down, and one actually talked to me. And I'm getting on a tangent anyway.
It's fascinating.
Yeah, I'm like, wow, she was healed, because instantly I thought of the case from Jacques Vallée involving a doctor in France.
In France.
Remember that case?
I do. Please share, though. Please share.
Yeah, he had a UFO hover outside his home, and he was hit by a beam of light. And long story short, he was healed of an axe wound on his foot. He had cut his foot real bad, gashed it. And this beam hit him, and this wound was gone by the next morning. And he had suffered injuries years earlier from the Algerian War, which he fought in, and had left him partially paralyzed. He walked with a limp. He had to give up piano playing. He was a professional piano player. Well, his paralysis was healed. And I thought, wow, wasn't there another case from Ralph and Judy Bloom in their book Beyond UFOs, involving a Peruvian customs official who was out on his veranda, struck by a purple beam of light from a little disc way up there, and it healed him of two conditions. And I thought this was so interesting. One was chronic rheumatism, and the other was nearsightedness. He was, myopia. And I thought, well, that is just beyond bizarre. How is this happening? And, this, as soon as she told me something, and click, 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 there was another case that dropped right into my mind. And it was two police officers in Damon, Texas, Deputy Good and Deputy McCoy, or one of them, I think, is a chief, actually. Deputy McCoy was the one who had his arm hang outside the window when a
Yes.
beam of light from a UFO hit him. This is a legit case. You can look this up. Deputy McCoy, or Chief McCoy, was a superior who had 50 people that he supervised. So, I mean, he was a good witness. These are police officers. And the beam of light struck McCoy's hand and he could feel it, the heat and the tingling. Well, he had just been bitten a day or two earlier by a baby pet alligator, which left this wound on his fingers, you can imagine. And it was bandaged up at the time, but painful and swollen. And they rushed away. They were terrified. They went at, I think it was like 80 or 90 miles per hour to get away from the scene and pulled off in a diner. And he's like, gosh, my finger isn't hurting, and pulled off the bandage. The cut was gone, the gash, the wound. And so those cases kind of dropped into my mind, and I knew of others.
Yeah.
I thought, you know what, I've got 100 bucks. I'm gonna look in there. I subscribe to the UFO news clipping service. I'm gonna look in there. And I started, I was connected with Richard Boyland,
Oh, Richard, yes.
a researcher, and a few others, Barbara Lamb, and several other researchers. I cornered Hopkins too, actually, because he never wrote on it, but I cornered him in a convention. I'm like, Bud, I got a question for you. It turned out that pretty much every major researcher, almost without exception, I'm not going to say everyone, but every major one, yes, had multiple cases. And I found 30 in the first month. And after a couple of months, I found 40, then 50. And after a year, I found over 100. So I'm like, well, I can't write an article about this. This has to be a book.
A book.
Yeah. And that ended up being my first book from Wildflower Press. I've since re-released it with, get this, Gwen, 300 cases.
Oh my God. Wow. And they just
yeah.
keep happening, right?
Yeah, and I think this is so important because there is a lot of misinformation and fear and confusion and like, why are they here? What are they doing? Well, I can tell you with evidence, with proof, with firsthand cases, that one of their main agendas, their missions, their goals is healing. It really is. And I've talked to so many people who've been pulled on board and like, oh my God, I was so scared. I had no control over this. I was frightened. And the very scariest thing I hear is people being laid out on that table or off the chair, as it turns out, and physically examined. And I always ask them, well, what happened? And as often as not, they report a healing. I'm not going to say it's quite 50%. I suspect it is, but a lot of people have so much fear they don't get all the information. And they do have missing time, because I don't think ETs are meaning to scare or hurt anyone. Someone's in complete panic, they will give you missing time.
Do you think that in all of the ones, the 300 now that you have, would you say that more are accidental healings, like the 3 that you just talked about, or planned, where someone is either taken and healed, or beings come to them in their home or something and do healing? What would you say that?
I suspect, now I can't prove this, but I suspect that they're pretty much all planned. I really do think, because I've come to realize that when someone sees a UFO, I think it's intentional, the ETs, and that's what I think we're dealing with here. So I know people have all kinds of theories about who these beings are, but I still think that extraterrestrial explains what people are seeing the best. It accounts for the evidence in the most neat way. I think, they're mostly planned. I can't prove that, but when someone's struck by a beam of light, what is going on there? It's not an accident that they're not running towards this beam and boom, because there are a number of injury cases. And I was looking at those too. And there was an extraordinary number of these, which involved people who basically ran towards a landed UFO or performs. And there was one where a guy was shooting at a UFO and the beam, they shot him back, and he did suffer what amounted to radiation sickness. There's a few of those. And I think those are, the injury cases are largely accidental, but the healing cases, no. here's one of my favorite, because it kind of speaks to this. This guy, Hector Vasquez, his best friend, David Del Mundo, was a contactee. This is in Puerto Rico or Brazil. And don't quote me on that location, but I do remember this case really well, because Hector Vasquez was being rushed to the hospital for kidney stones and had, real pain with this. And down comes this UFO and starts circling around their car, which was clearly intentional. And what's so odd about it is they weren't taken on board. There was no beam of light. There was no missing time. But Hector's pain started to lessen, and then it was gone. He sat up in the chair. He's like, I feel good.
Oh
They
my
went to
gosh.
the hospital and the kidney stones, and I've got a number of cases involving kidney stones alone.
Mhm.
Yeah, they were gone.
A lot
Sure,
of them.
some mysterious way.
Mhm.
So,
Mhm.
now the list of healings, Gwen, is so amazing. Diphtheria, diabetes, kidney stones, liver disease, heart disease, backaches, flesh wounds of all kinds, 30 plus cases of cancer, AIDS, 2 cases.
Mm.
I mean, you name it, it's been healed. Hepatitis, jaundice. It's so extraordinary. 20 different types of eye problems, myopia, nearsightedness, farsightedness, night blindness,
Mm.
glaucoma. Oh, I could go on for hours about the number of healing.
Mm. Perhaps the things that have been talked about in past times or in ancient times as miracles, miraculous healings, by people believe they came from either gods or higher beings of some kind. Maybe that's what this is. Maybe that's what this was, is just beings who were able to heal people. And at that time, we just didn't call them what we call them now. So I'm certain they must have been around probably as long as human beings were on the earth. I don't think this is anything that just happened, in our lifetimes. Yeah.
A lady in Maine, just real quick.
Yes.
A lady in Maine, she was healed. She had a tumor in her lung. And the doctors were like, we're gonna have to remove half of one of your lungs. And that's when ETs came and healed her. And they told her all kinds of stuff. They said, we're watching over you. You need to tell people to stop putting out the greed that they're putting out, because you're on the pathway of destroying your planet like we did.
Mm.
They told her all kinds of stuff. If people should start missing from this planet, it's being done by us for the universal good. And they said, who you thought were angels in ancient history, a lot of that was us. So yeah, I think that is absolutely true. Maybe not all, because I looked into angels and I'm like, wow, there's some very compelling evidence for, angels and, demons as well, because people would tell me, this is a demonic phenomena. You have to understand that. And I'm like, well, I don't think it is. No, I looked into that. It's a real thing, but it's a separate phenomenon. It's got nothing to do with this.
Yeah, but it's interesting. I recall a few cases, I think, of healing that were in your book or that you've put in your articles, that they're all very interesting. But this just recently came up in a group that I facilitate, a support group that I facilitate. A few of the people had started talking about being fed by otherworldly beings when they were on board ships or in circumstances. And it made me think about the healing stories that you had told about when people were given pills or something else to consume, perhaps some liquids or something, that I thought, hey, that made me think of Preston's book again about that. You've been writing about that. What about people being fed? Do you have any ideas, or have you talked to people who say they actually recall eating some kind of a gray food or some kind of a pink food or something, or a liquid?
Oh yeah, that turns up fairly regularly. They will give people liquids, pills. They heal people in all different kinds of ways. Often it's involving light. Sometimes it's just your standard sort of hands-on healing. They will give people pills. That's not super common. Liquids, I think, to serve different functions.
Okay.
Because sometimes it's just nutritional. Other
Mhm.
times I think it's medicinal. I mean, there's a few cases that speak towards it might, allow them to forget. I wrote a book called Symmetry,
Yes.
is all about one lady I interviewed who's got fully conscious contact. It's my favorite case, hands down, because it's so extensive.
Mm.
She's fully aware and has had thousands of visits. I mean, she's actually worked with the ETs directly. It's an extraordinary story. And so whenever I have a question along these lines, I can go to her and ask her about that, because I had some questions, I'm like, what's this liquid? Because
Mhm.
people would describe this sort of neon green-ish liquid or pink sometimes, and that kept coming up. And I asked her, well, what is that for? She said, oh, that protects you from the radiation exposure that sometimes can happen when you're up there, because
Mhm.
the gamma radiation in space is a problem for not only us here on Earth, but ETs as well. And she said
Mhm.
that's largely one of the things that they will give people. Yeah, she answered a lot of my questions. I'm so delighted to have hooked up with her, because she explained a lot for me.
Mm.
Yeah.
That's amazing, amazing. You've talked about some really fascinating healings that you've read about or researched. Can you say that you have a favorite? This is probably a hard question to answer, or perhaps one that that I don't know, really touched you in a certain way more than others.
Oh, wow. That is a hard one. Um, well, there's a number of them that are immediately coming to mind. I did interview this one lady whose husband was a contactee, and I suspect she was too, because after interviewing her, she did have unusual childhood experiences, figures coming into her room and such. But she suffered from glaucoma, the thinning of the optic nerve,
Mm.
and it was not going well. And they went out camping in the woods behind their house. I believe this is on the East Coast somewhere. At any rate, she had a visitation by praying mantis type beings.
Oh.
And
Mhm.
she woke up and she could feel them beaming, and she was lying on her stomach. She could feel them doing something to her, and she couldn't move. She couldn't see exactly what they were doing, but she heard them chittering uh, in her tent. And she said she didn't feel any fear. She doesn't feel like these guys are there to hurt her. She got a good feeling from it. So she just kind of went along with it and noticed an improvement in her vision, and went to the uh, ophthalmologist. And he lost his mind. He's like, oh my gosh,
Oh,
this can't happen. Your optic
wow.
nerve is not, I mean, it's the size it was. What happened? She
Hmm.
did not say what happened, but yeah, there's lots of really touching stories. One comes from Dolly Saffron, actually,
Oh,
because she had slipped and broken, I believe it was her elbow. When going outside, she slipped on the ice and just went head over heels, bam, and cracked her elbow and got all bruised up and was in a lot of pain. She was rushed to the hospital, and they, put a cast on and so forth. And she was recuperating at home when she was in so much pain. She decided she was going to go downstairs, get a glass of milk, and take some pain relievers. And the kitchen lit up, and she's like, "Oh, what's going on?" And in walks, there's two little grays, a tall gray, and he says, "Do you recognize me?" And she says, "No, I don't. Who are you?" And he said, "You know me. You know who I am."
hmm.
She's looking at him and she's like, "Oh my gosh, he looks like me." She's like, "Oh, is this my hybrid son?" And he's like, "Yes, I'm your hybrid son.
Oh,
And I'm always watching over you. We would never allow harm to come to you. I've come to help you." And it came and actually healed up all her bruises and helped heal up her arm, not completely, but mostly.
mhm.
She had a big, long, loving meeting, and she rushed up to him, touched his face, like mothers do with their
Wow.
kids. That was really poignant. I mean, she had tears in her eyes as she told me this. And it's really very encouraging to listen to people describe these stories, because, it touches you right in your heart chakra. Hearing,
Yes.
hearing these people like, wow, It's such an amazing experience. She got to meet her son, which often does happen with people who agree to have children for the ETs. At some point, they will show you, like, here's your baby.
Yeah,
She's grown up.
yeah, that would be very moving to hear about. I won't go into detail, but I will mention that I have also been privileged to receive healing from extraterrestrial beings, and these were the ones who came to me in my home. So I can tell you folks, it's real. It really is. And then all of the other things that you read in Preston's work just builds on top of that. It's there are, many people who have had traumatic experiences, contact experiences, and but that's not all there is. There are positive things too. And I find that some of those people who began with traumatic experiences then find that it changes, it may change some way. I would assume that you probably have heard that also from some people you've interviewed, where perhaps they started out with a traumatic experience, and then for some reason, maybe when they're a little older or something, it changed in their mind.
Yeah, that's a very prominent pattern. I think what happens is people live in a state of denial. And we're kind of taught to fear. We don't want to face it. People will rationalize their experiences. They'll deny them. They'll explain them away. They won't think about them. And sometimes it reaches a point where the trauma is the only way they're going to wake up. And so ETs will appear in their bedroom fully conscious. And that way they cannot deny it. And this can be very difficult for people.
Yes.
And yes, people have told me about being diagnosed with PTSD and having real trouble sleeping for a while, and fear of intruders and nightmares. But more often, I mean, I would say about 80 to 90% people after their third or fourth encounter where they're taken on board realize, well, gosh, I've been healed. I'm having all these out-of-body experiences, and I've got this ability to do healing, and they taught me how to fly their craft. That was true with Dolly and a number of people I've interviewed. I mean, I absolutely sympathize for people who are having a hard time with it. And I totally understand. And I would never in a million years want to interpret their experience for them. It's their experience. And I would really encourage people, particularly those who are having a hard time with it, to step back, recognize that you are all right, and let's take a look at what actually happened to you in a facts only way. So we can see if this is, something that is harmful or benevolent. And the vast majority of people I talked to said no, they want their experiences to continue. Not everyone, but 9 out of 10.
Yeah.
I've talked to some people, one guy who was devoutly religious, and he says, I just don't like it. I'm like, that's fine, I understand. There was another guy in England who had many benevolent experiences, but he just feels a sense of violation. And he just doesn't want to have these experiences. And I have to respect that, because it's not all fun and games for everyone. But yeah, I had a lady who said, I thought they were the cutest little things. They appeared around my bed. They examined me. She was never paralyzed. She showed no fear. They healed her back problems and gave her the ability to heal, and warned her about all the upcoming catastrophes here and there, which is a very common message. But yeah, her experience was 100% benevolent.
Yeah, and I think what I'm seeing in the work that I do, and I hear this from other people too, and you probably, I don't know if you would agree, but I imagine you would, that there seem to be fewer negative experiences that are happening now. That doesn't mean they still don't happen, but it appears that something is changing, and there's a lot of different explanations that people believe, raising vibrations and things like that. I don't know what the answer to that is, but I do know that I hear about fewer negative experiences now than, say, 5, 6, 7 years in the past. And that's gratifying, because I don't want people to hear people are suffering. So is that changing? It is definitely changing, but what is changing? Is it
I think it's,
there who are changing, or is it we who are changing? What do you think?
I think it's we, honestly, but I think because ETs have been around for a very long time. The very first thing they will tell people, and this I'm sure you've heard, they would say, do not be afraid. We won't hurt you. No harm will come to you. Have no fear. Everything's fine. This is the first thing they will tell people. And yeah, we have a lot of fear. There's a lot of fear and disinformation surrounding the subject, and that is changing. We have now come to really get a good handle on what to expect when someone's taken on board.
Mm.
And I think there is a real problem with, I'll say it again, disinformation, because there are things that, researchers call MILABs, military abductions, which I can't say I've really specialized in, but certainly you run across these where people have very negative experiences and it ends up being not ET. This is government doing some terrible things to their own citizens and it's basically staging an abduction. I think that does occur. Dolly will not use that term abduction. And a lot of the people I interview don't use it either. They prefer the term contactee or experiencer. And yeah, I think it's a matter of perspective. Because again, when you're in complete fear and panic, it's easy to say, well, I don't like this. This is negative. This is bad for me. I am not enjoying myself. Because no one wants to be out of control in fear. But if a person doesn't have a strong fear reaction, this is when ETs will communicate with them in depth and tell them exactly what's happening. Like, would you like to see the ship? Here's what we're doing. You have a problem with your stomach. We're going to fix it. I hear that. Here's a great case, which I just love because it speaks to that. This guy was, Jim Law was his name, not happy. He was in Gainesville, Florida when the ETs showed up again. He's like, darn it, these guys. It had happened so much that he was starting to get used to it, but didn't like it. He says, if you're gonna take me, why don't you heal this hernia? And they said, oh, we know of this condition that you speak and we will repair it. Almost a direct quote. And they did. They healed it right then and there with a little handheld device. Wow, why are you taking me? And they said, we are interested in your genetic potential to live a long time. And that really impressed him because his grandfather was 106.
Oh my goodness.
And he had two aunts that lived past 100, and his mom, his whole family, had good longevity. And I think that speaks to, I found it really interesting. It really made my mind wonder because I thought, well, isn't it interesting that humanity has kind of doubled their lifespan over the past, 200 years? I wonder about that. Are ETs, helping us along, protecting our genetics? Certainly, that's exactly what Dolly says, that the main purpose of people being pulled on board is because we have gamma radiation coming in, and our magnetic field around our planet is not doing well. And they have been doing the best to hold us up, to protect our genetics. And I think that's borne out by the research of other people like Barbara Lamb and John Mack and Edith Fiore and Ray Hernandez and Timothy Good and many other researchers have found pretty much the same sort of thing.
So I think also it's that a person's experience with contact or actually with anything else in their life has so much to do with belief systems, with what they've been taught, with their own other kinds of experiences in life. And so, as you mentioned, if there's fear there, then that may hold someone back from having a positive experience. But the more that we talk about this, and the more that we share, and the more good material that's out there, that's published, and that people are interviewing and talking about, I believe is helping us to be less fearful. I certainly hope that is true. And with so I've been doing this for about 14 years now, and the groups that I work with now seem to be much more curious and interested about what's happening rather than fearful. And that's great. That's great. You know, they want to know. They're in the group to talk to other people and to teach other people. So yeah, that I agree with you. I kind of think that what's changing is human beings as well.
Yeah, yeah, and I know you want to talk about this, so I'll just kind of segue to
Okay.
it, because I did some research on schoolyard UFO
Yes.
encounters. Uh, I'm sure you've heard of the Zimbabwe case at Ariel Elementary School, very well known. In brief, some 200 students were on the playground at Ariel Elementary School in Rua, Zimbabwe, when a UFO landed. Well, there was two, I think, and 3 ETs came out. 60 kids saw this. A smaller group saw the ETs and communicated with them. And while some did have fear, a lot didn't. And a lot of these children had never even heard of UFOs. I mean, these are grade school,
Yeah.
primary school age.
Mm-hmm.
I thought, wow, isn't that interesting? Because I thought I started to connect the dots. I had a few schoolyard encounters myself, where a kid was taken from the playground.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, well, wasn't there that case in Wales, Broadhaven, Wales? And I looked it up. Like, sure enough, a UFO had landed next to Broadhaven Primary School in Wales in the 1974, 77. And ETs came out and they're like, oh my gosh, little kids, they all drew the pictures. And I thought, wait a second, there's that case in Crestview Elementary School, Opelika, Florida, 1967. And there was some 200 kids on the playground and teachers, by the way. UFOs came down and I believe they landed as well. Yeah.
Mm.
Oh my gosh, there's the Westall High School case in Melbourne, Australia, a year earlier to the day from the Crestview case. And that same thing, UFOs land. This was a high school, but all the kids came running up and it was a prolonged encounter, 20 minutes. The UFOs landed. Teachers saw it as well. And that's when I thought, you know what? I want to dig deeper, because I had access, like I said, to the UFO news clippings.
Mm-hmm.
And, the internet, of course, was up by this time.
Mm-hmm.
And I started collecting cases. And boy, I don't think I've ever been so shocked in my life. Because you're in this field for a while and you think you know everything.
You've seen everything. Right.
I've heard it all. I'm like, you're not going to surprise me. Because I interview people, I'm like, yeah, check. Most
Uh-huh.
people, it's hard to surprise me because I've talked to so many people. But I was surprised because I found over 100 cases. And they were very poignant, some of them, with these little kids describing how these UFOs came down. And these were such amazing cases, Gwen, because there's nothing like them in the
Absolutely.
literature. These are daylight cases, for one thing. That's pretty rare.
Yes,
These are
it is.
very, very low level. I'm talking 100 feet, 200, 300 on the higher end. But landing, and humanoids are seeing, and get this, 1/3 of the cases, 1/3 involve humanoids and landings. Half of these cases of the 100 I found, and it's far more than that now because the book came out. And of course, that brought in new cases. Half of the cases occur at elementary, primary schools. So these are the youngest of our children. They're so unfiltered. They don't discriminate. They usually don't have fear of someone who looks a little different. So this was just so touching to, trace these cases and talk to some people myself. Like one lady, Melody Korn, described her experience with 6 of her friends on a playground where they got separated from the main group of kids. They were going to play tag. They didn't want to play Foursquare. So they were on the far end of the playground and about to play tag, and they noticed little footprints on the ground, tiny little footprints. And they're looking at them when they saw lights right beyond the playground in the trees. And their first thought was ice cream truck.
Yeah.
So they looked at each other and they jumped, the barrier. It wasn't so much a fence, but a little barrier, and ran into the woods right next to the school. and it wasn't, of course, an ice cream truck at all. It was a UFO landed, and there was a being there in a little jumpsuit, and they all stood up in a row. He was 10 feet away. He backed up and went into his craft. And as he's going into his craft, Mrs. Ollendorf, one of the teachers, screams. She sees him, right?
Oh, yeah.
Because she's trying to get them back into school.
Kids, yeah.
She's like, get back in class. And so they all rush into the classroom, because she's corralling them all up. And they, of course, rush to the windows and like, look, the UFO. And the teacher calls the principal and the other teachers and like, what do we do? What do we do? And she's shutting the blinds, trying to keep the kids from seeing. Well, they corralled all the kids into the gymnasium and cut class short for that day. And one of the kids shouts out, look, there it goes. He saw it through the high windows of the gymnasium. But that was the buzz of the school for months.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, the teachers forbade them from talking about it.
We're talking about it.
But it
Was there anything done in the press in that community relating to that, or did they just like shut down on that too?
Shut down. Most of these are shut. They don't go no further than the local newspapers, which I did find a lot in the local newspapers.
Local press.
But this was 1966. And it was so interesting because that's when, it was a month later, the Hillsdale College incident happened in Michigan. Super famous case. 87 students, faculty, police saw a UFO hover for 2 hours. It actually landed next to, a lot of people don't know that, but it did. And when that happened, Jim and Coral Lorenzen made a comment. They're like, wow, you know, we've had so many schoolyard cases. This is a thing. They're doing something with it. Yeah. We think this is preparation for open official contact. And Raymond Fowler of Betty Andreasson fame, the Allagash abductions, he's a great researcher. So I have 15 unexplained cases this year. This was, March. This was April. And he said 8 out of 15 involve schoolyards. And they're like, this is going to happen again. And it was 2 weeks later that the Westall High School case happened. So yeah, this is a thing. I tracked cases to 1950 every single year up to the present day, pretty much. I think the latest case I found was 2019. Sometimes it takes a while to trickle down. But yeah, most are only reported in local newspapers and don't get much farther than that.
So I want to ask one more question. We're getting kind of close to our time here, about the aerial school in Zimbabwe, what happened there. And I wonder if I have been to conferences and I've heard a couple of people speak who were there, children at the time who experienced that, but I haven't really followed it very much. Is someone following these children and what their lives have been like since then? And have they found, I mean, does it seem that they've been affected throughout their lives, or what do you know about that?
100%. Yeah. The Broadhaven students still hold reunions. So did the people at Rosieball Elementary School. That's another case. And that's absolutely true with the Ariel Elementary students. Randall Nickerson put together an excellent documentary. The Aerial Phenomena. And Emily Trim is one who's speaking publicly and gets tears in her eyes when she speaks about this, because yes, it affected her profoundly. She ended up having regular contact after that. That does turn up in a number of these cases. This is sort of the beginning of a lifetime of contact. And I will say that a number of these people are profoundly affected in ways that change the directions of their lives. Some became UFO researchers. Some became quantum physicists. Some became UFO advocates and speaking. I mean, Malcolm Robinson of Scotland has written a number of books. He's one of Scotland's leading UFO researchers. He had a schoolyard UFO encounter. He and all his friends playing football. This was a primary school. Had this giant sort of silvery, I think it was a globe-shaped object or egg-shaped object, just hovering there, very low altitude, making the teachers nervous.
Yes, I
The tea-
imagine. Mhm,
teachers don't react as well as the students, generally speaking. But yeah,
mhm.
one kid, not one case of anyone retracting, not one case of any evidence of a hoax. There are landing traces, there are photographs in some of these cases, moving films in one.
Mm.
So yeah, it's extraordinary subset of the UFO phenomena,
Phenomenon. Mhm.
which
Yes.
deserves a lot more attention.
Yeah.
I'm gonna have to put out another book because honest, the 100 I found, I've got almost double that.
Wow. Yeah, well, it is definitely, as you say, a very important subset of this phenomenon. And as I mentioned earlier, I think this is why what you're doing is so valuable, because you're bringing to the um, consciousness of most of us normal or everyday people that this is huge. It's huge. I don't know how many, I have many friends who are not involved in this at all. But they have no idea. If I start talking about some of these things, they're just like, what? Are you kidding? So it's important for people like you who are writing, you're writing good books, you're writing factual books and entertaining books. And so I'm so happy to that you're out there working and you're still at it. So that's what we need. We need people who really have a passion, but um, who are also willing to look at things with an open mind and not just always believe everything. No, you take the time to investigate it and to speak with people, and that's really important. So I think it's about time for us to close today. I'm so happy that you were here today, and we definitely will want to have you come back and talk about implants or some other things that you would like to share with us.
Yeah,
I highly recommend all of your books to any of our viewers. They are interesting, they're easy reading. They don't take a lot of space on your shelf, but there's something you can pull down time after time and look at, and they'll make you think and put pieces together. And that, I think, is what's so important in good writing, and especially in this field. So before we go, is there a website or an email that you would like to put out for our viewers in case they want to talk to you or they want to tell you about something that they've experienced?
yeah, certainly. Thanks, Gwen. I'm pretty easy to contact. So if you go online, you should be able to find me. My website is my name. So it's basically prestondennett.weebly.com, but not too hard to find. I'm also on Facebook and other, Twitter and Instagram. And I do have a YouTube channel where I'm putting out my research for those who don't really have the time to read books or don't prefer another method of getting their information. But
Yeah.
my books are available on Amazon, and yeah, you can reach me. My email is super easy to remember. It's prestonufo@gmail.com, and always
Great.
love hearing from people. This is, I agree, an important subject. It has the potential to change the way a lot of people think about themselves, each
Mhm.
other, and our place in the universe. So I
Mhm.
appreciate what you're doing too, Gwen. It's
Yeah.
really important.
Well, thank you. Before we close, I have one last question for you. And this is probably one that you get asked all the time.
Uh-oh.
But the question is, after all the work you've done, all the years, after all the study and the research that you've done, and especially speaking with people individually, do you know what's going on here? Do you have a feeling for what is happening with humanity and with these other beings that we are being interacted with? I mean, is there a plan, do you think? What?
Yeah, I think there is. I think this is what other researchers have found, uh, that basically the ET goal is got a few levels to it. Certainly they are collecting genetic material from us and from plant life, animal life. They're protecting our genetics. They're protecting all the life on this planet in case there should be an existential crisis. That's one thing. Their healing is a big part of this. I think warning. They're very much, whenever anyone gets a message beyond, don't be afraid, we won't hurt you. It is what I mentioned: nuclear proliferation, pollution, our warlike ways, greed and corruption, destruction of the environment. That is what they're warning people about. Another is, please, this is a major ET goal, and that is to wake up to our own heritage, to our own immortality, to our connection to them. Because this is a message most contactees will get at some point, which is, we are you, you are us, we are one. They really want people to wake up to their psychic abilities. And you will see this with contactees. They report seeing ghosts, shadow people, having mediumship abilities, past life recall, astral travel, remote viewing, healing.
Healing, healing, yes.
So this is what they're trying to do. It's all about healing, guiding, teaching, warning, and waking people up. It's like Betty Andreasson, Quasga, told her, love is the answer for humankind. That's coming from a gray.
Yes.
And that is a message a lot of contactees get. I think that's what they're trying, that's why they're here. Because, and just real quick, when this wasn't happening in the 1800s, yes, there was evidence of contact, but when we had the ability to destroy our planet, nuclear weapons, starting around the mid 1940s, late 1940s, the atomic age, that's the modern age of UFOs. That's when they came down in large numbers. That's when people started reporting being taken on board. I don't think that's a coincidence. I think there's ETs watch us on a road towards self-destruction and said it's time to do what we can without violating the laws of free will and karma. We will intervene to the extent that we can, but it's up to us to solve our own problems. That's another message a lot of contactees will get. So yeah, I'm very encouraged. I'm delighted to know that we have people out there who do have our best interests in mind, as opposed to our own power elite or governments, who I don't trust, not with this subject, certainly.
Well, thank you so much. It's all good food for thought and for people to think about. And so I loved having you today. And I'm going to say goodbye to our viewers then. And I'm going to end the recording, and we will love having all our viewers back again on our next episode. And we will look forward to having Preston join us again at some time in the future. Okay, thank you very much.